The Motor Dream podcast is recorded on Wallamedigal land of the Eora Nation. Sovereignty has never been ceded. We need an Indigenous voice to Parliament and a treaty. It always was and always will be the lands of the First Nations of Australia.
This is the Motor Dream Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Motor Dream Podcast. I'm Connor McNally, and this is the podcast that delves into the age-long question that every car nut often thinks about. What cars they would like to have in their own dream garage, if they had the budget and bank balance to afford it. Each episode I get to chat to people from within the motoring and motorsport world, be it a driver, rider, mechanic, team principal, or within the media itself, and ask them how they got into cars or bikes and what their dream garage is. Along the way, you may even hear from some well-known personalities who share the same passion for cars. The premise to the podcast is quite simple. I tell my guests that they discover that they receive a text to say that they need to check their bank balance. They then open their bank app up and discover that they have become Elon Musk billionaires. As soon as they discover their newfound fortune, they get an email from this mystery benefactor, and it tells them that they can spend anything that they like and buy any car or bike or machine that they want. But there is a catch. They are only allowed 3 cars or bikes or machines in their dream garage. Sounds easy in theory, but trust me, it isn't. It gets people thinking, and each person has some weird and wonderful responses, like my guest on this edition of the podcast. Maddi Patterson is one of the few full-time female motorsport journalists that covers MotoGP. Having wanted to own and ride horses when she was younger, it wasn't until that she dated someone that loved motorcycles that the course of her life completely changed. She wanted in, and she was determined to be an integral part of the MotoGP life. She's travelled the world, starting out as a grid girl, and established her contacts along the way to eventually become a journalist both here locally and overseas. She's also been through some real hardships in the last few years, having been involved in a freak fire that left her with substantial burns to her body at the end of 2020. But Maddi was determined to fight back, and she sought out to prove to everyone that she would fully recover from this misfortune. Now happily married to her husband Simon, himself a fellow MotoGP journalist, Maddi is living that very life that she dreamt about when she first fell in love with 2 wheels, and she's unashamedly proud of it. I've had the pleasure of knowing Maddi since 2019, and the person that I met back then is the same now, a fun, happy person who is living her best life. And I'm pleased to say she's my guest on the Motor Dream podcast. Maddi Patterson, welcome to the Motor Dream podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. I feel like we haven't spoken for ages, so this is actually a great opportunity to catch up.
It is a great opportunity to catch up. We first met, you and I, back in 2019 when you were travelling around with the Australian Superbike Championship, and as much as you were a lovable pain in the proverbial for me, given that you're a Parramatta supporter, as in the Parramatta Rugby League team, and I'm Canterbury, you have a real passion for motorcycling and the sport as a whole. But that's not necessarily how you grew up. You grew up loving horses, and then you fell in love with someone, and instead you fell in love with bikes, ditched him, and you've been following motorcycle racing ever since. How does that work?
That's a very quick overview of maybe the last 15 years, 20 years of my life. Do you know what? I feel like it's like the telltale Australian girl story, all right? I grew up in the Southern Highlands. I was always on farmland, and I had a pony, and I loved my horses. My dad was really into horse racing and into the trots. So that was just kind of like a normal part of my life. You know, I used to work on the farm of the man who I bought my horse from. His name was Harold. And I used to sort of help him wash his horses and all of that kind of stuff. Like typical girl, right? Typical Australian girl.
Yeah.
I grew up watching the Saddle Club. This was my life. I was going to be a horse girl. But then I quickly realized that my pony couldn't live in my Sydney CBD apartment with me. So
we all try and dream that. It doesn't always.
Exactly. Well, now as an adult, I have a donkey and I live in Ireland. So give and take. But at that time, I was so young, and I wouldn't necessarily say I grew up with motorsport. My dad was definitely into it. He really enjoyed watching motorcycling on the weekend, and sort of formative memories for me watching the back tire of bikes lean like this. And I don't recall the racing per se,
Mm.
but I know that that's what I was watching. So I really remember that as a child. Um, and then, as a young adult, I got into a relationship, as most young adults do, with an Italian guy who, we're not together anymore. I'm married to an Irishman. My name is Patterson now, like, go figure. But we were together for a long time, and he was like Rossi super fan. Um, and I used to watch him watching this thing, and I'd be like, oh, this is so stupid. And then I watched one, and I was like, oh my God, I am hooked. Like, this is going to be my life now. And following that, we started going to races. He knew a couple of people that were working in MotoGP, and we were lucky enough to attend overseas as sort of guests. Um, and I think the first time I attended, that was when I was like, you know what? I want to do this. I'm going to find a way. I want to do this.
Yeah.
Uh, and fast forward 6 or 7 years, I'm here. And it's really bizarre because I feel like I was speaking to a friend about this last night. I've achieved so much. Everything I've set my mind to, I've achieved. And now I'm like in a place where it's like, okay, cool. I have like the opportunity to pick and choose and really, live my life authentically in the way I want to now. So it's just been like a whirlwind couple of years. And, I have to thank motorsport because I met my husband through motorsport, and, we complement each other. Our personalities work really well. And if I didn't have a boyfriend when I was 18, I don't think my life would be the way it is now. And it's really weird to think of it that way looking
Yeah.
back, but that's how life sort of happens.
It's funny how things just turn out when they do, and you're obviously enjoying doing what you do now. You're obviously one of the frontline journalists in MotoGP. You travel to every race in the MotoGP calendar, and it's not an easy market to get into because MotoGP and probably most of the top line categories in motorsport, be it 2 or 4 wheels, they have the mindset that it's still very much a men's club. It is very much a male-dominated sport. It is obviously changing, but unfortunately, for people like yourself, you still have to battle that glass ceiling, and quite unfairly, I must say, because you certainly have a lot of talent, but people still remember, in some respects, how you started. As I mentioned in the beginning,
Yeah.
you were an umbrella girl.
Yeah.
That's how you got your foot in the door, which is not a bad thing, but you knew what your end goal was, and you've got to that end goal, and you still have to prove yourself. Does that frustrate you?
It does. And you know what? I think on top of that as well, people like to say to me, oh, you're only here because of your husband. Like, my husband's quite a prolific personality. Everybody knows who he is. They either love him or hate him. There is no that is black and white. So I feel sometimes it is an uphill battle.
Mm.
And I think as well, because I've grown into this adult now, I'm not a young adult. I'm sort of entering my 30s. I have a very different mindset. I see the world differently.
Mm.
Because I have the opinion now of things like maybe promotional models should be dressed better. Maybe they should be endorsing better brands and things like that. I'm a marketing professional. That's my entire background. So when I think about that application in my workplace, people like to say I'm very hypocritical, or, you did this, so you can't say that. And it's almost like, what do I have to do to prove to you that I'm knowledgeable? That, yes, I was a promotional model. I know many women that were,
Yeah.
many, but I had an end goal. And I think also, people forget, yeah, I was a promo girl, absolutely. But on top of that, I was taking unpaid annual leave out of my full-time job to go and chase the Australian Superbike Championship around the countryside every weekend that it was on.
Yep.
I was also taking unpaid annual leave to travel to Europe for 4 days at a time because World Superbikes, at the time, there was a really great guy that was working at Dorna, and I respect him so much because he really gave me the foot in the door and really helped me with getting media accreditation and finding ways to get published. And he really gave me that opportunity. I think he saw it and helped me.
Yeah.
So, between 20 and 24, 25, I was spending a lot of my own money, my own time, building relationships, holding umbrellas, meeting people, and doing everything I could, everything I possibly could. And as a result of that, my relationship failed, my previous relationship, because my career became more important to me. And I get ticked off when people are like, oh, she's just Simon's wife, or she's just an ex-grid girl. And it's like, it's things like that I feel put others down. And also, I have to say, I'm so fortunate to be Australian, because when I think back to like my ASBK days and Pro MX days, I didn't have bad experiences.
No, yeah,
I really didn't.
They were very good days. And I know we only did a couple of meetings together. I actually travelled with you. We travelled down together to Canberra to do a Pro MX round.
Oh God, we did, didn't we?
You did, and we had a great time. That's what made it so enjoyable, because I think the Australian media as a whole, yes, I know there's a lot of, I guess, bitchiness at the best of times, but a lot of people get together. Like, it's a huge camaraderie. Like, even as recent when I was doing the ASB came around at Sydney Motorsport Park, the one under lights, everyone was so supportive of one another. And that's what's great about the Australian motorcycle racing, and probably Australian motorsport as a whole.
It is like that, though, but it is like that in Europe too, right? The only difference is the juggernaut is so much bigger. So obviously, it's like a city. The bigger the city, the more likely the crime rate is higher. It's just part of the parcel. But looking back to where I started, I have to thank a lot of people. I have to thank you for the opportunities you gave me when I met people. I have to thank people like Peter Doyle, who went out of their way to introduce me to people. Martin Port, another one that just was happy enough for me to sort of follow around and meet people and introduce me to people. And I look back and I'm like, I know in my heart of hearts that those people who are sort of in charge of the FIM Oceania, in charge of Motorcycling Australia, no matter how we feel independently about organisations, we all individually know that the better our relationships are, the better our outcomes are. And I know that those people look at me and go, she's nailed it. And if I have a question, I can call them and be like, I need help. I don't know what to do. What would you do in this circumstance? And counterpart to that, I also have to thank my previous managing director at my old job, because I was working in events full time as a sales and manager, who would let me take unpaid leave because he knew that that's what I wanted to do. And I don't think I think if you want this kind of career, you have to be able to make good in relationships, because that kind of opportunity doesn't make itself.
Exactly.
You really have to make it. So I think when it comes to MotoGP itself, it's competitive. I think I probably get a little bit more crap than others. And I think I also get that because I'm not scared to say it how it is, which not everyone likes. And I appreciate that, but I don't really care. I actually don't, because what people think of me in their own time, if they're talking about me, that's great. That's great. That's their business. If that's what you want to do that. In the meantime, by being authentic and being dedicated to my work, I've been able to make further great relationships that really benefit me. Yeah. So I'm not concerned with what other people think, and it's competitive. And I think when you're a woman, it can feel slightly more competitive because there are less of you. So it means that the opportunities that are afforded to you are perhaps more competitive. So it means that the tension in that sort of female community can be a little bit higher. And that can be hard to navigate. But again, it's all about picking the opportunities you want. And you don't, life is a competition. It is. Everything is out to win. But it doesn't mean that you have to have bad relationships with your competition either.
When you first got into motorcycle racing, what made you fall in love with it? What made you go in hook, line, and sinker and go, yes, this is for me? This is
winning.
Really?
Winning.
How come?
Winning. Because I'm a highly competitive person.
I figured that.
I love that. That was why. That's purely why. I love the sport because I'm not an athlete by any means. Okay, no, but I'm highly competitive. I'm very driven, and I was a salesperson, so winning kind of plays to my personality. And I remember watching this racing unfold, and I was just like, "You've got to win. You've got to win." And there's no I almost feel bad saying it, but there's no better podium than a first place podium. Like, yeah, second place, like, cool, good job, but like, is it a first? So I think for me, it was really that it spoke to my drive. It really made me feel like engaged, this opportunity to win. And at that time, I was probably a Rossi fan like everyone else. Um, as I've gotten older, I think I've kind of moved away from being a fan, and I can watch the sport as a whole, and I can appreciate when people have improved and when they've stepped up into the top 10 and when they've taken a step on the podium. And it's nice to kind of move away from just being focused on winning and enjoying the sport. But at that time, all I wanted to do was win, and the sport really nailed that for me.
As a person now that is fully ensconced in MotoGP, in the media side of things, do you think we're seeing a positive swing of more women being involved in covering the sport? Obviously, Formula One in particular, they've got Naomi Schiff, Danica Patrick, Rachel Brooks, Susie Perry recently. And Susie Perry's done MotoGP for many years with the BBC. Do you think we're starting to see a more positive shift where we're seeing a much more female prominence in the media side of things, or do you think there's still a fair bit of way to go?
I think personally, right, this is how I feel about it. And not everyone's going to agree, but I think sometimes the women that we see in sport play specifically to one demographic. I know in the UK that demographic might look like 35 to 65 sort of white men, upper middle class. And that's there's no shame in that, right? Because broadcasters have different audiences. And I think what can be really hard as a young person or a young woman is finding your tribe. So, in the same hand, as much as we are seeing more women, think about Susie Perry. Susie Perry's been here for 35 years. Like, she's been in the game for a long time. She has her audience. Her audience know her. They love her. There's a certain data set that fits Susie Perry's audience.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. That's sort of how BT operates now, Discovery. That's their audience. I think with Discovery coming into that broadcast game, that audience is going to change again. Definitely in Formula One, Natalie Pinkham, she's been in the game for a long time as well. If we think a bit younger in terms of journalists in the game, Claire Cottingham's a great example of it. And in the same token, Claire, Natalie, I'm sure to some extent, Susie, myself, we all open ourselves up to huge criticism. I know Claire last fortnight on Twitter just shared a post that a 17-year-old had made, and I won't go into too much details, but basically he was rating women in the W series, like rating them. And she just said, like, this is what deters women from being involved in sport in general. And she got absolutely crucified for it. Like, how dare you say that? And you're stupid. And this, like, hours of this on Twitter unfolded. And that's not unusual. That's a rather common occurrence. When you speak up and you say, hey, maybe this is wrong, maybe we should do better, people don't necessarily like that. And that's not everyone. Most people are quite sensible. But when you live in this insular world, everything feels very real. And I think the point that I fight a fair bit, and the point that I make specifically to people like the FIA and the FIM, and I've been to many of their joint conferences, is what are you actually doing to make people feel safe in the workplace? Because at the end of the day, it is a workplace.
Yes,
it's athleticism, but you have a paddock of at least 2,000 to 3,000 people on a weekend that are freelancers, contractors, work for teams. Everybody's employed. But because they're all self-employed in some capacity, there's no real overarching hierarchy. So if something goes wrong, who do you go to? And I wrote a piece about this a couple of months ago.
I just was about to bring that up because, you got quite a few people talking in regards to one particular rider got quite abused by his own team. I think he got slapped or something. And that caused quite a bit of a furor in the paddock at the time, and you spoke up about it, and it got quite a few people talking as a result. So where do you think there needs to be a change in terms of, the hierarchy?
Well, when I look back at that piece specifically, right, the boy that was assaulted in that video that surfaced, he was about 22 years old at the time, right? So he was an adult. you have to remember, like, at least a quarter of our athletes are below 18. You know, in Moto3, we're talking Moto3, they're 17 years old, 17. So you have children in the workplace. Where is their child protection officer? Because if you had children in the workplace at Disney, they would have a child protection officer. You've got young adults who are majority boys, that's a fact. They've got high testosterone levels. They've lived a very insular life. They're highly competitive. Where is their access to healthcare and psychological healthcare?
Yeah.
Because that matters, because they're 18. They're not out partying with their friends. They're probably not having regular relationships with women and young boys and developing those skills. And they're working for 10 months of the year. So, you know, they also need that support in their lives. And that's what I struggle with in MotoGP. I feel like there are so many holes in terms of, you know, riders' health, employee health. We're also on the road for 10 months of the year. Like, I see my family for 3 days a year in Australia. That's it. That's it. Because by the time December rolls around, it's €7,000 for a flight. Like, no, it's just impossible. So I think there are things that MotoGP could do really well. I think mental health is one of those things that goes very overlooked. You also have to remember, we're in a sport where accidents happen.
Yes.
Big accidents happen. People do die. People do get fatally injured. People do have lifelong disabilities as a result of our sport. And we still do it. But if that's the case, you know, there needs to be emotional, physical and mental support for everyone in the paddock in some capacity, because we're all watching the same race. We all know the same people. And I think that can be something that has gone overlooked. And I think in terms of our paddock, I have to give credit to one team specifically, and that's Aprilia Racing.
Yeah.
Massimo Rivola, who used to obviously be quite prolific in Formula One, is the managing director at Aprilia Racing. And this year he's brought in his own team of doctors, and not for his athletes, for his staff. And I think that's so highly commendable. And I think that would obviously take a bit of manipulation in the budget, but being able to have the foresight as that's something they might need because they're all away from home for 10 months of the year, that's pretty cool. That's a very good initiative. And I would love to see sort of Dorna and the FIM and IRTA sort of take up that responsibility as well. And I can't speak for how it is in Formula One. I really don't know. But I also know that they have a very, very diverse calendar and are away from home just as long as we are. So I can imagine how that would mentally impact a person, and especially young people, you know, because they're not developing like you and I did. They're not having normal social interactions. They really live in an insular world. So they need that support.
All right. One final question before we move on to the real crux of why we got you into the podcast. Does racing a motorcycle have any interest in you? Would you ever do it?
Funny you mention this. No, not me personally on a motorcycle. No, mate, no way. However, I know what my skills are. I know what I'm good at, right? Yeah. And recently, how do I put this? There's been a bit of a I'm going to say sham announcement, because they've launched a women's world championship to start in Europe next year, but it's a world championship that has 6 rounds. And it's not to deter women from entering the actual other existing world championship, which is 12 rounds and 24 races, but like enter the 6 because that's the final destination. As the FIM president put it, the final destination for women in racing. That aside, I think if I was ever to enter racing, all I would want really is a team, the best in the business, and I know who those people are, and to win. And I know exactly the pilot I would have. I know I've thought about this thoroughly, and I think like a team is something I would look at doing. I think a team is far more achievable for me as a team manager. You know, sponsorship, sales, that's my background. And motorsport is a hard sell, right? Convincing a brand to sponsor you is a hard sell, especially in your first year, unless you go out and win. And as we've discussed, you know, there is no second, there's only first.
Correct.
So I think, you know, riding No, not for me. I'm okay with my 2 feet on the ground, or doing a two up with anyone that will take me. But um, a team is something I've considered, and that's something I'm looking into in the future. So we'll see.
Well,
We'll see what occurs.
I was just going to say, and I hope you don't mind me bringing this up. You've already laughed at death once. I don't think you want to laugh at death twice. For the relevance of people listening, Maddi went through a very traumatic experience in 2020 when she unfortunately got herself in an accident that involved fire, and she had quite significant burns to her body, and it was a very long recovery process. But I look at you now, Maddi, and you look magnificent, as you always have been. But it was a long and hard road for you to get to where you are now. So, like I said, you don't want to laugh at death twice.
You know what? I think if I can get through this year, if I can get through 27 and 33, I'll be fine, because I feel like they're the cursed numbers. But to be honest, when you go through something as traumatic as that, and I really thought I was going to die, like 60% of my body was burnt off. I was sure I was going to die, and I didn't. And it makes you so much more grateful for the life you live, but also it kind of, once you psychologically go through all the steps, you kind of have like a no fear barrier. I don't know how to explain it. Like I've really worked hard on my PTSD, and I'm not scared of flames and things anymore, because I recognize that it was a freak accident. Like, for that to happen twice, must be cursed. But now I'm like, I'll do anything. I don't have the fear anymore, because the worst thing that's going to happen is I'm not even going to know about it. Like, I won't be here. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's probably not the best outlook to have, but it also means that I don't have fear in my daily life either, because the worst thing that someone's going to say to me is no. So, like, turn the page, move on, focus on the people that say yes. And that's played into my life. So yeah, no, I don't think I'll be racing a motorcycle, but we'll see if someone else is.
This is the Motor Dream Podcast.
All right, we want to know how much you love cars or bikes.
I'm a bit nervous about this, to be honest, because I feel like I'm out of my element now. I'm out of my element.
I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving it as a result. What was the first car or bike that you owned?
An Alfa Romeo 2006 156 executive model, black with a white leather interior and wood grain dash. And I know it and I love it. And it was the biggest heap of shit I've ever owned. And I would still buy it again.
Alfa Romeo is one of those brands that it always is a piece of shit, but you still go back to it because you love it. It's like,
do you know how good I looked in that car? I was like way too young to have this car. And it was like manual. And I remember I used to stall it because I'd only just got my license, and I would stall it all the time because it was a sports car. So it took me a long time to learn how to drive.
Learn how to drive a manual?
That was how I learned to drive manual. I learned to drive manual in that car.
That's brave.
So every other car after that was manual, super easy. That car, incredibly difficult. But I loved it. But the problem was I was on my L's when I got my car, and I could only go 90 kilometers an hour. And that's the kind of car that needs to go fast, so it would regularly overheat, and I did not care. And there's a fun story about how I got it, but don't worry about that.
No. Tell us. We want to know. Go on.
I feel bad. Okay, so car is in the car yard, right? I see it, and for some reason I'm like, Dad, this is the car. And my dad is like, Maddi, no, absolutely not. You can get a Holden, you can get a sedan, you can get a Ford for all I care, but you are not getting that. It's going to cost you so much money. And I was working at the time. So first job, I'd saved all the money. I had about $6,000 saved, and the car was $12,000. And I was like, I can't afford it. And I think I turned 18. I just turned 18 when I got this car. So I was like, okay. The mechanic was the same age as me, just a little bit older. It was around the same age. So we start chatting, and then I asked him on a date. We went on a date, and then I came back the next week. The car had gone down $3,000. So we went on another date. Came back the next week. The car had gone down $3,000. And then I was like, I'll buy it I can buy it now. It's like in my budget. So it's come down to $6,000. I bought the car. Never saw him again. Horrible. Like that. So bad. But I say that I never saw him again. My dad and his dad regularly have coffee, so we get updates on each other's lives on a regular basis.
Oh, now that's one way to get your first car. That's very
I know.
interesting. Very
Oh my
interesting.
God, it was so. I don't recommend it to anyone listening. Please don't do that. Like, I mean, do it, but just. I'd like to think I had some self-respect when I was a teenager, but I'm fully aware of the fact I didn't. So yeah,
I think we all did at that age, don't we? Which leads me to the next question. Which car do you wish was never made?
Oh, do you know what? My mum's like Ford pickup. I
Really?
hate it.
What, an
I hate it.
F-150? F-150 or something? Or
No, it's not. It's not a pickup. It's like a 2006 Ford hatch thing, but it's like a four-door, no, wagon. That's the word. It's a wagon, and it is the most uncomfortable car, Ford Falcon wagon to drive in the world. It is just. It has no suspension, and she's a little bit older now, so when she drives the speed humps, you really feel them because she might not see them, but you do. And I have so many memories of road trips in this car, just having like severe sickness, like movement sickness. And I never had that in Dad's car. I never had it in Dad's van or any other car. It was just Mum's car. Like I honestly think it was the biggest heap of crap ever made. And it was made, and it wasn't even a good car for mums or families. It was just such a piece of shit. And she still has it.
have you
And I'm like,
taught?
Mum, just get a new one, get a Mazda, get something else. Like, why? Why? She's like, oh, but there's so many memories. And I was like, of me vomiting in the back seat. Like, you don't need it.
I shouldn't laugh.
Oh, it's a heap. Like, I feel sorry for anyone that has a Ford wagon. Seriously, they're just the biggest like shit. And not the modern wagon, not like the four-wheel drive high up wagon. No, we're talking like low to the ground, big boot space, like put 3 dogs, 3 children in a picnic basket wagon. Like, I hated that car. I still hate it. I wish it was never made.
Speaking of road trips, what's the first road trip you remember going on, and where was it? Was it in that wagon?
It was in that wagon. It was in that wagon. I feel. Oh, do you know what? My mum and dad and I, when I was really little, we used to go somewhere every weekend. Dad would finish work at 5 on a Friday. We'd all get into the car and we'd go somewhere. I'm just trying to think. I don't know where the first place I went was. I feel like a real formative memory for me was probably traveling down to Wombian Caves, which is sort of south of Goulburn
Yes.
way.
Yep.
And I remember being quite scared because at that time, to get to the caves, it was a single lane dirt road on sort of an inverted cliffside. And it wasn't like a particularly high cliff, but I remember being quite scared when I was little going on that road. And, from where we lived at the time, it was probably like a 4-hour drive. So I remember that being little, but I remember Wombian Caves was probably like one of the more formative places of my childhood because we'd spend time camping there when I was little and we'd go there a lot. But we'd also go to like Broken Hill for the weekend because we could. There's not much at Broken Hill.
No.
Or Dubbo or Lithgow or the geographical. I remember going to the geographical centre of New South Wales like that, and it's just a big like lead rock.
I do have to pull you up there a little bit because there is a few little things in Lithgow, but that's like vineyards or whatever. But that's about it. I was there for a wedding.
When you're 5 years old, like I'm drinking Ribena. I'm not drinking nowadays. It's like give me a Pinot. Give me a really tall glass of Pinot. But when I was 5 years old,
it's
only
Ribena.
It's hot and it's sticky. Yeah.
All right. Do you remember the first time you actually changed a tyre on your car?
I do.
Tell us about it.
I do remember. I was with my dad. I wasn't in my car. I was driving his Holden Commodore. It was like a 2007 4-door sedan, nothing special, automatic. And we were on a dirt road between Dubbo and somewhere that we were going. My dad would have been about 17 or 18, so I was still driving. And we'd hit something, and it was quite scary actually. And I'm glad I learnt this lesson now. We broke down on the dirt road. The tire had popped, and Dad was like, "Well, now's your time." So I put the jack up, and he's teaching me how to change the tire. The jack gave way because the dirt that we were on was like hardened dirt, and it was hollow underneath. So like it had been obviously flooding, and when the ground dries and it cracks. So it was hollow underneath. So I learnt some important lessons. Number one, never have your legs under the car when you're changing your tire. And it was like everything was fine. I didn't have my legs under the car anyway, but that was a lesson that I learned. So I remember learning that. And then Dad kind of like I don't know how to explain it. The car was not particularly heavy because it still had 3 wheels on it. So he was kind of able to like lift the other side, and we just moved forward a bit and we had more stable ground, and I put the T back up and I changed the tire. But that was my first time changing a tire. I remember
Wow.
it vividly, and Dad was walking me through like all the steps, and it took me like 45 minutes. Like a thing that should be relatively quick took me time, but that was the first time I had to do it.
Yeah.
So I think I learnt a lot of lessons the first time I had to change a tire.
Was it your dad that taught you how to drive, or was it someone else?
Yeah. Yeah, well, my dad taught me for a little while in the manual, and then I figured either I was going to kill him or I was going to kill myself. So I decided to go and get driving lessons to finish learning how to drive in the manual. But I would drive with Dad in the automatic on a regular basis. No problems with that. But driving the manual, I kind of took it upon myself to like get help, because Dad yells, you know, he's very loud and yelly and angry and just a lot of built up emotion. So I didn't need that while I was driving.
No, no one does. Actually, is Simon, your husband, is he one of those yellers, or is he much more docile and very supportive, or do you yell at one another when you go driving?
I think I love my husband to death, right? But he just does stupid things. So sometimes I'll say to him, babe, turn left, and he'll turn right. Or like, babe, take the exit. And he's like, no, it's the next one. I'm like, it's this one, go here. So sometimes we have little tiffs, and you got to remember, like, we spend 99% of our time together.
You can swear a little bit if you want. So
I'm sorry, it just slipped out.
No, do it.
It was the built-up anger when I think about driving with my husband. And I'm like a proper passenger princess. And weirdly, the only place that I will comfortably drive, like I drive obviously, but the place that I really enjoy driving is in Italy. And he hates driving there, so it's the perfect spot. And he tries to tell me what to do in Italy, and I'm like, shh. You just shh.
Well, you were married to an Italian. You did at the Scuderia. No, that was your previous marriage.
That was my maiden name.
Yeah. So, you've got the Italian in you a little bit, so makes a lot of sense.
Oh, yeah, don't worry. I can drive in Italy.
I believe it. Pet peeves in terms of, like, you know how you've got those family stickers? You know, are those...
I hate it.
Hate it?
So stupid. I feel like the family stick figure ones is just silly and also unsafe. Like, I would never tell people how many children I have in my car. Like, why would you do that? I think people who wrap their cars, I actually feel like sometimes wraps look really cool, really cool. But other times I'm like, why would you do that? And in the words of Kim Kardashian, it's like putting a bumper sticker on a Bentley. Like, why would you just wouldn't? Just don't do that. Like, why would you do that? You know what I mean? So I sometimes I get frustrated with things like that. Also, people who put homemade spoilers on the back of their cars. I know you want to be fast and furious. Go to a workshop and get it done. Like, go and engineer it properly. You're a 17-year-old from like Western Sydney. You do not need to be putting a piece of like corrugated steel on the back of your car. Go and invest in your machinery properly, please, and get it painted the same color.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. All right. You've got your own quirks with your own car. So what is the weirdest thing that's in your car or van right now?
So the van is Simon's van, right? Like, that's his baby. I just drive it sometimes. My car, I have a Volvo CX-90. And I love this car. This car it's 2004 model, 7-seater. I feel like a yummy mummy. I don't even have children, but I feel like that's the car that mums that wear Lululemon drive. Okay, it's that kind of car. The weirdest thing I have in my car, I'm not gonna lie to you, it's probably all of my donkey stuff. I have like donkey feed. I have like the harness. I have her blankets. I see my donkey like almost every day. She's my baby. I went from being a horse girl to being a donkey girl. And that, and like maybe 20 plastic bottles, like water bottles. And I recycle them. I take them to the recycling plant, but like it's a real chick car. Like, it's mostly clean except for all the garbage in it. So just a bunch of water bottles and random animal and horse feed.
All right. And that leads us to the last question. Eating in cars. Are you for or against? Bearing in mind, you've got 20 water bottles in the car, so there must be a very...
See, but that's drinking. That's like, because I road trip, so I've got to stay hydrated, you know? It's like a long way to go. I think how do I put it? So in our van, we've got a home conversion on our van. So we like live in our motorhome. So we have a kitchen, we have a dining table, we have a closet, shower, toilet, fridge, everything. So I think that's one thing because it's made to live in. In my car, no, no, we don't need to eat in my car. Like if you want hot chips and sauce, like we can get out, we can sit down. I don't want to eat in my car. It's just no. Like then it smells like McDonald's. But in saying that, I also go through the drive-through and will get a hash brown. But I feel like it's one hash brown. I'm not going to have like an entire meal in my car.
I seem to remember when we were in Canberra, you begged me to go to a McDonald's to get you a hash brown. I do remember that. You're caught out.
Do you know what's embarrassing about that? I'm sure that 99% of my friends have the same story.
Correct.
The exact same one.
And you were
hash brown queen.
And you were rather
Was I drunk at the time?
Yes.
Was I drunk at the time?
Yes. No, I picked the next morning I picked you up. You were a little bit under the weather, and you said, "Can you get me a hash brown, please? Can you take me to the drive-through?" I'm like, "Yeah, all right."
You know what though? That's just so sad. Like that's just a real Maddie story. Like,
It is
not unique. That's not unique. I promise you, it's not.
You, beer, footy, you tearing me to shreds when my team's losing. Yeah, that's a
but
typical.
I'm such a girl, right? I'm so female sometimes. I'm like, give me a glass of prosecco. I'll do my hair. I like to look the part. And then other times it's like, no. I'm going to Combank Stadium in Parramatta tonight. You can call me another day. I'm busy. Like I'm such a, but then also like I have to be the best at snooker and I have to be the best at pool. Like I don't know how I developed into this, but I'm like a girl's girl. And then at the same time, I really want to be one of the boys. And I think it's just because I really like sport and I really like the atmosphere around it. And I find that the blokes are a little bit more loud.
And you try and match it to them. You try and match it to them.
Yeah, it's a competition. I told you, everything's a competition.
I know. It is very much a competition. I know. I've been on the receiving end of your barbs.
But Canterbury did get slaughtered that night. Like, I'm sorry. It was a good night.
Can we not talk about that? Thank you very much. Nor can we talk about what happened a few weeks ago whilst I was in Japan. We are severely depleted Bulldog side that's completely decimated by injury against your lot that just seem to not hit their straps until late in the season. You know, what's going on?
Yeah, story of my life.
Yeah, exactly.
Story of my life. There's no rush. Develop in your own time.
Yeah, thanks very much. All right, Maddi Patterson. You wake up one morning, you get a text, and it says, "Please check your bank balance." You check your bank balance, you open it on your app, and you see that your bank balance has just instantly changed. You've become a billionaire. You've become an Elon Musk style billionaire. So you have all the money in the world. And then you receive an email and it says you could spend whatever you like on cars, anything you like. But the caveat is you're only allowed 3 in your dream garage. So with the benefit of a bit of time to think about it, Maddi Patterson, what is the first of your 3 cars that you would like to have, or bike or machine that you would like to have in your dream garage?
I think like this could be, I feel like this is not as special. Like okay. How do I say this? So I feel like if money was never an object and I wanted to be a real show pony, I'm obviously going to get a Phantom. Like, but that's been like a Liam Gallagher style rock and roll, live forever.
This is a Rolls Royce Phantom we're talking about here.
Yeah. And I feel like I would never drive it. I would have someone drive it for me because why am I going to drive it? You know, I have all the money in the world. I don't have to drive it. I feel like that's one.
But would you do the Liam Gallagher thing and dump it in a pool?
If I had the money, yeah, absolutely. What do you like? Do you know what I mean? If you wanted to be a real show pony with your money and money was no object and you were like, nah, let's have a good time. Like it's hand painted. A man walks from one end of the Rolls Royce with a little paintbrush to the other to
Yeah.
put the line on. And they're trained for years to learn how to do that. Like, absolutely. I would, and if it ever needs a paint job, you send it back to them. And the same man does the paint job with the line of paint. That's insane. It's so cool. I would absolutely trash it just so I could pay for that to happen again.
Makes logical sense to me. I mean, let's put it into perspective here. Like the current generation Phantom has a 6.75 litre V12 twin turbocharged engine in it. It's rear-wheel drive, does 0 to 100 kilometres in 5.3 seconds, and the cargo volume is 548 litres. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me why you want to trash it and get the same guy that painted the car to repaint it again.
The thing is, it's actually not a great car, but I don't want it because it's a great car. Like 0 to 100 in 5 seconds is slow, but I don't care because I want it because it's a Rolls Royce. So I feel like that would be one thing I would definitely, if money was no object and I really wanted to be a show pony, I would have that in my garage. That's something that I would have it because I could have it, not for any other reason, just that I could have it. So that would be number one.
That would be number one. So you wouldn't drive it, you just trash it like Liam Gallagher.
Oh, I'd have someone else drive it for sure. For sure.
You could get Simon to do that if you want.
No, like someone who can drive.
Okay.
So tell him I said that.
Okay, number 2. What's your second choice?
Number 2 is a hard one because I feel like there are two logical cars. Now, they're not exactly expensive cars, right? They're affordable for people. They both sit between the $40,000 and $55,000 mark. And I don't know which one I'd pick. I don't know if I would pick a 2002 Monaro or if I would pick the 2022 Mustang.
Ooh.
Now, the reason why I'm having trouble with this is I was just in LA like 5 days ago. I'd rented a Mustang for like 2 weeks, and let me tell you, Sally, little flick of the wrist, she is fun. She is fun to drive. Like that car is just, and I had the convertible, so it was really like California living life.
Wow.
Fun car to drive. Very easy. Like she moves. She is made for racing. She moves really quick. You only need to move your wrist a tiny bit and you're in the next lane. But the reason why I struggle with that is I'm like, oh, it's a Ford. It's a Ford. Like
you're not a Ford person, I know.
I'm not. But this car, I was like, oh, I could be this car though. I could drive this car. And my mum and my stepdad have a 2002 2-door 4-seat Monaro, and that car to drive is a little bit like Sally. Like she's fast, she's loud, she's got a V8 engine. Like you hear her coming, and she's just sexy. Like. And for me, I would never say a Holden or a Ford are sexy cars, but I feel like the Monaro and the Mustang is Australia's answer to an American muscle car, and vice versa. You know, they sit that same kind of way in my mind when I think about racing internationally, when I think about supercars, when I think about what the average Australian would aspire to have 20 or 30 years ago in their garage. It probably was something like a Monaro or a Mustang, that kind of dream muscle car. So I'm not sure which one I would pick, but I can say I've driven Mum's Monaro, and yes, it's fun, it's loud, it's noisy, but Sally, oh my God, just the littlest flick of the wrist and I was ahead of everyone. And like sport mode, it was scary. It was scary, but in the best way. Like I enjoyed driving that car.
We might allow it. We might allow you to have both of them. I think we sometimes make rare exceptions that if you're on the fence, we might allow to extend the garage by 1 or maybe 2. In your circumstance, because you have a fondness for both, we're going to allow it as your second and third choices. So we will allow it. But I do agree with you. Like the Mustang, I love the current look of the Mustang. If I was ever going to own a Mustang, and the current Mustangs are now 5 litres, but they are so good. They look amazing.
And they feel amazing. Like to sit in that car, all right, and it's 4 seats. I'm not quite sure how, because there was no room for anyone in the back. I think it's just like, if you must have a designated driver, put the other people in the back. I think that's why it's designed like that.
Yeah.
But sitting in that car, and you know what? We drove through the canyons between Malibu and Calabasas, and anyone who has a bit of a geographical idea of Los Angeles will know that the canyons are just like Mulholland Highway is just spectacular driving. And in that car, it was special. It was so special. And I can imagine doing Mulholland Highway on motorcycles as well, because the roads are just built for speed. They're built to race. And, I know a couple of road racers that live in Calabasas and Malibu and literally prepped themselves for racing in the canyons because it's the only place you could get down on one knee, and it was special. And doing it in that car was like nothing I've ever experienced. There's not a road like that in Australia. I promise you, like that road, that car, like that was California dreaming. It was so special.
I don't think there's anything else to add to that. I was going to say if I was going to get a Mustang, I'd get the mid-'80s Fox body style Mustang, the same one that Dick Johnson had, because that's a beautiful looking car in my opinion. Because I grew up watching that when Dick raced them back in the day. So for me, that's my ultimate Mustang. But when I look at the current Mustangs now, oh my goodness, I would own one in a heartbeat. I'm not sure about
and the thing is, I used to think they were really ugly. I used to think that was just a stupid car to have until I drove one. And then I was like, I see why. I see why everyone wants one.
Yeah. The Monaros, I thought they looked good back in the day. Unfortunately,
I
sales-wise,
still think they do.
They still look great now. Sales-wise, it didn't reflect because they just weren't as high-selling, say, to the Commodore. I know they're all Commodore-based, but it's just a shame because...
But it's insane now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You look at the prices of, a Monaro being sold now, that's just ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous.
Crazy. It's like up to 65 grand. I saw one recently listed, a 2002 model for 65 grand. And it needs body work. It needs engine work. And I was like, who would pay 65 grand? But it's become an icon.
Exactly.
And I think there's a lot of money in the name Monaro now, just as there is in the name Mustang, vintage Mustangs anyway.
Yeah.
But new ones, like they're cheap, they're not expensive. Like, I mean, they are, but they're not, you can get a 2015 model for about 25,000 USD. That's not particularly expensive if it's got less than 50,000 K.
That's pretty decent when you think about it.
It's a new car, really.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. All right. We've already decided that the second car choice has now become the second and third car choice. So what's your fourth and final dream car, bike, machine, whatever it might be in your garage?
Oh, we have to finish this off with a bike, don't we?
I'm so glad you thought of that.
When you told me about this, I was a little bit like, I love racing. It doesn't mean that I'm an expert on motorcycles, all right? But I know I love certain bikes. I love Aprilias. I love a Ducati. You can't go wrong with a Ducati. They're special, fast, incredibly sexy looking bikes.
Oh,
I would go as far to say that even the KTM recently, the KTM has stepped up that game. It is fast, it's special. The engineering behind the road bikes themselves, they are great bikes. However, I don't want any of these things. I want one that does not exist anymore. I want Matt Oxley's TT winning Honda.
Wow.
And that's what I would have. And anybody who knows me knows that Matt and I are like best buds. He's my drinking buddy in the paddock. He's also like my life coach when I need help. I'm like, Matt, what do I do with my life? Please help me. But that's what I would do. He had a production Honda. He won the TT with it. And that is the bike that I would want to have. If it existed, if money was no object, if I could get it, I would have it. That is the bike I would want.
So what?
Because it's special.
So what particular model Honda is it? Can you divulge a little bit about what it's about?
It's a 250cc. It's not particularly special. It's a TT bike. It's made to go over the mountain. He did the mountain in, oh God, what was it? Like 1 hour and 11 minutes, which is insane. And that wasn't even his fastest time over the mountain. He'd done previous rides in like 1 hour and 8 minutes. So he was fast then. They're faster now, but even then he was fast. So I think I would want that bike just because it's special, just because it's not one that I would drive. It's not one that would go anywhere. And there are plenty of bikes you could have. There are plenty of cars you could have, but how many like TT winning bikes do you get to have in your house?
It's very rare, isn't it? Very, very
Yeah.
rare. And why isn't it in existence anymore?
Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't know if it is or not, but I have to ask him specifically. But I know he doesn't have it.
Oh,
So
he'd be furious about that he doesn't have his own TT winning bike in his collection.
well, we'll see. But maybe he does. I'll have to ask him about it. I don't think he does. I don't think so, because he would have told me if he does. So I don't think, I feel like we've had this, Matt and I tend to have conversations when we're about 3 glasses of wine deep. So sometimes things go missing in the mind. But
so too many brain cells destroyed by wine after a while.
Yeah, sometimes. But I feel like that's the bike I would want to have, and I would want to have it because Matt's my friend more than anything. And I only got into TT in the last couple of years as well. TT was not my background as far as racing goes, and now I'm like, I love this place. I love this place. This is an incredibly challenging place in terms of man and machine. It's incredibly challenging of some of the things that occur. Again, the accidents happen, and when they happen at the TT, they're big. But the road racing community is just like a different insanity. They are like some of the most dedicated fans, and like John McGuinness. I have fans that can tell you every single statistic about John McGuinness, every single one. So they're really ingrained. It's part of their culture, particularly in like Ireland, the UK. It's a big part of who we are. So yeah, TT's become a special thing for me, and I feel like if I could have a bike, I'd have a TT winning bike, and if I could pick one, I'd have Matt Oxley's TT winning bike.
I think that's a perfect way to end your dream garage. So let's go through it again. The Mustang, which I'm utterly impressed with, and the Ford Monaro. Not Ford Monaro.
Wow.
I know. I wish I could say that. Let's start that again. No, so the Ford Mustang and Whole Monaro, definitely agree with that. The Honda TT bike, that's utterly impressive. And the Rolls-Royce Phantom that you would trash in a pool and get rebuilt every time. That's just blows my mind. That's really, really cool. I think that's a perfect way to round out our little chat. It's been an absolute pleasure, and it's finally good to catch up after so long. You've been badgering me for a while. I want to be on your podcast. And you finally got on it, and I've absolutely enjoyed this chat. It's been utterly a pleasure, and I hope we get to do it again sometime.
Absolutely. It sounds like a plan. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. I hope that was a good look into my mind.
It was a very good look into your mind.
It really is, actually.
I've enjoyed it. I listened. I must give credit to the Girls on the Grid podcast, because I listened to it a little bit yesterday with Priya Richards and her chat with you. That was very entertaining, and you obviously are very passionate, just as much as everyone else is that is involved in motorsport. But I know you quite well by the fact that you really are dedicated to your passion, and that means a lot. People that are dedicated to their passion, it shows through in their personalities and that's what that's what I enjoy about you and your passion for the sport, and it makes me happy to see you doing so well on the world stage with MotoGP, flying the Aussie flag, and all I can say is keep it up. You've done well.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and we'll do it again soon. Hopefully I'll have some more interesting cars to bring to the game.
I'll have to let you think about that one. I'll have to see if the bank manager will allow me. So, thanks, Maddi. Thanks for the chat.
Thanks so much. Speak soon.
It was awesome to catch up with Maddi, who I've not seen for a few years, but she's doing awesome things in the MotoGP world, and you can read up on some of her work via the Motorcycle Sports website at www.motorcyclesports.net. You can also find a link to the Motorcycle Sports website in the show notes via the MotoDream podcast website at themotodream.com.au. The website is also where you can find all past episodes, information on all the guests who've appeared on the podcast, and links to connect us on all the socials. Speaking of socials, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram with the handle The MotoDream, which is also the hashtag. And as always, please like and subscribe and leave some feedback. All feedback, good and bad, is always appreciated. And share with your friends. That's how the word gets out about this show. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Motor Dream Podcast. I'm Connor McNally. I hope you can join me again for another episode real soon. And as always, please drive safe. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Motor Dream Podcast. This series is proudly produced by Beast Productions.